All right, we're here with Brian Charles Rooney, who is a veteran of the New York stage. He's been in more shows than any of us can probably count by hand. Why don't you talk a little bit about your journey as an actor and when you decided to do this professionally?
I guess in high school, I grew up in New Jersey, went to an all-boys Catholic school, Catholic high school, and we did plays because our drama teacher thought that singing wasn't acting, something I disagree with immensely now.
Especially with a voice like yours, right?
Thank you. But we did a lot of plays with dialects, which was interesting for me, and would later serve me well, I think. But I didn't start singing until I got to college. I went to Duke University, and the first musical I did was Merrily We Roll Along, the Sondheim musical, and played Charlie in that. And I didn't know how to read music, and I had not sung in public except for one school thing once before. But with the help of my musical director, I ended up learning all of that insane music and falling in love with that art form. And so through college, I did as many musicals as I could, and kind of when someone would tell me, no, you can't do this, or no, this might be too high, or this might be not the right thing, and I felt in my gut it was, I would make sure that I did it so well that they couldn't say no. And sometimes that worked and sometimes it didn't, but at least I didn't regret, not having tried. And then I came to New York after I graduated, and my first paid job was as Che and Evita, which was a huge favorite of mine and a dream role, and I never got to do it in school because they never did the show. And so for 3 months I did that, and someone in the audience one night had a brother who was an agent, and she called him and said, you have to see this guy, you have to meet him. He was based in LA, but he had a bi-coastal agency, so he had, a little while after the show closed, he had come in to meet him and his associates, and I had my first agent that way. So that was lucky. The normal way is more kind of mailings and hoping someone sees you in a showcase, or either from your school or showcase production. But it was a good fit for a while because that agent introduced me to a lot of people, a lot of casting directors, a lot of directors I had never met and wouldn't have met otherwise. And I evolved, and I learned that I needed to trust my instincts when it came to what I was right for and what I wasn't. And long story short, I made my Broadway debut as Lucy Brown in the Threepenny Opera that the Roundabout Theatre Company produced in 2006. And from that point on, I sort of had permission to audition for and play things beyond what people had considered me right for in the past. Things that I knew I wanted to play, knew that I could do, but because I looked rather innocent, especially when I was first starting out, people would say, oh, isn't that adorable, you want to play the villain. Well, that isn't always easy when you walk in looking like the kid next door. And with Threepenny Opera, I suddenly had a kind of permission slip to do that, and I'd say that was really when my full-fledged career began. I mean, I had laid the groundwork before that. I had done things like National Tour of Music of Andrew Lloyd Webber, which I have to say before that and after I was two different singers. It's like going on an Olympic kind of training session for several months. And I had done some other worked at Paper Mill Playhouse during that time, and at local theaters like Gallery Players, which is an old, kind of legendary at this point theater company where a lot of people get their start. Harvey Fierstein was kind of instrumental in starting that group, and it's a great community for people starting out especially. You get to do a lot of good work, and you don't have to travel too far. And a lot of new things along the way as well, which opens doors that you wouldn't necessarily have access to, because when you do a new show, a lot of producers tend to come, a lot of casting people come, if it's marketed the right way, and you're seen in a way that maybe those people haven't seen before. And that's been hugely valuable and for me in my career, particularly trying to do new work. Even if it means less pay, I always feel like it has led to something bigger. So.
You mentioned Threepenny Opera being the turning point for you to play a different type of role.
Yeah.
What point in your career did you start getting to play roles that you really wanted to play, in terms of like turning down things you didn't necessarily want to do? When did you get to that point where you could do only what you wanted to do and not just as a job?
I think partly because I can do a lot of different styles of theater and music. I can earn a living by singing in, doing symphony gigs, doing concerts on my own, producing my own shows, doing plays and musicals. That has afforded me a bit more independence. And there have been one or two jobs where I might have wanted the money, but I didn't feel like I connected with the part, and I feel like if that's the case, I shouldn't be auditioning for it. I don't have business, auditioning for something I don't feel 100% invested in. And there were a couple times that I was offered something rather large, and I didn't say yes. And my agent was incensed. But on the other hand, that agent came to understand why. But it's been in the last, I guess, since then, since in the last 4 years or so, 5 years, that's happened, where I wasn't as quick to say yes or to seek out things I might not be 100% match for or love. But yeah, that's been more of a recent thing.
This may not be the easiest question to answer, but what, for you, do you feel it's easier to connect with your audience when you're singing in a musical to them, or when you're acting dramatically?
It depends on the style of the play.
Okay.
I've done a lot of plays where I've had direct address with the audience, or it's the type of comedy where you're very aware of the audience and the audience knows that, and the fourth wall is broken quite a bit. I'd say that the last few shows I've done, a show called Pop about Andy Warhol, it's basically a very interesting conceit where Warhol gets shot, and the show kind of takes place in the moment where his life flashes before his eyes. And I played Candy Darling, who was one of his superstars, and there's a lot of direct address with the audience between Candy and the audience, because she sort of narrates and helps drive the bus, so to speak. This show I've just done, Bedbugs, is kind of a theater of the ridiculous type of comedy, and there wasn't so much direct address, but there was definitely an understanding that the audience is aware, and they are that the characters are aware of them. This kind of wonderfully unspoken flavor, feeling, that they're with you for the ride, and you're kind of sitting with them in spirit. So I don't know that I could break it down into whether it's easier to connect as far as whether the material is musicalized or not. I think that depends on the audience member. I spoke with someone recently who talked about her ability to connect more with people on stage when they were singing as opposed to just in a play. And I found that interesting because I thought, well, I suppose that's why there are different forms of performance media, because they all touch people differently. I find that it's the story and the style of direction usually for me that dictates whether I connect with the piece or not. And of course the performers. If you come into the theater and there are certain things about a performer you like or don't like that's going to color your experience. But I think musicals make it a little easier on the actor because there's underscoring and it can kind of manipulate how the room feels. That makes it a little bit less of a task.
What advice would you give to somebody who's just starting out? Somebody who, in your shoes now, that maybe is different from when you were in your shoes then.
Right.
Because things are different from when you started.
It is different now. There's a lot more. I mean, there's always been a focus on body and what's under your clothes as far as show business, but in theater it wasn't as much, and it has in the past 8 or so years become very important. And I hate saying it, but I think when you come here, make sure that you are as healthy as you can be, not only physically but mentally. Have a strong support system, but also make sure that you exercise and eat well, because caring about your body and taking care of yourself does have an effect on your mood, and that has an effect on whether or not you're hired, I think. And of course there's the superficial, type of decision making that goes into casting sometimes, where they may need somebody who looks a certain way. But I find that it's for me, it was more difficult to be hired if I were more out of shape than not. That being said, the other things are to find material to audition with that you really love and really connect with. And it doesn't matter if it's overdone, quote unquote overdone, or if someone else has done it and, before you go in the room, if it's your song and you love it, then you should do it. And there are a lot of audition coaches that, in New York, who will tell you one thing and then you'll take a class with one the next week and they'll tell you the opposite. And you have to be aware that whatever they have to say is valuable because it's advice, but you can't abandon your instincts. An actor's instincts are one of their most valuable tools, and that doesn't apply just to on stage or in the rehearsal room. It applies to the work you do at home, marketing yourself, and the work you do in the audition room, and the work you do networking with people. Make friends, go out. You can't, the work doesn't come to you, you have to go find it. And staying home does not yield work. Go see shows, see what you like, see what you don't like, and meet people. That's important, meeting people and making friends, building a community that you can work in.
Perfect. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Sure.